Hey everyone, Sean O'Connor from Macabre Daily here, and I have the incredible best-selling author Grady Hendrix with me today. And Grady, we're going to talk some witches
Yeah,
because you,
let's talk witches. Although it's very hard to resist your Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires poster.
well, I'm not. I guess I should say that I had the poster hung already, but when I listened to Super Scary Haunted
Oh,
Homeschool, and
right.
you gave the history of it. I was over the moon. Now, okay, before we talk witches, as long as we're talking about your podcast, I know the next season is Haunted Houses.
Yes.
Please, when does it start?
So I'm trying to get all the scripts written by summer and then record through the summer. And so I'm hoping that in the fall we'll be able to release episodes more regularly, every couple of weeks. That's the hope. That's the plan. Whether the plan comes to fruition or not is up for grabs.
Uh, all right. Well, look, I'll be patient. All good things come to those who wait. So
Yeah, I'd like to finish it in shorter than 5 years, which is what took the first season.
The fact that it's Haunted Houses, though, I mean, I'm ready to bite through my knuckle. I'm so excited. Okay, so we've got Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. It just came out. Look, it's no secret that the book is getting incredible reviews. New York Times called it superb, which is
Always nice to hear.
pretty darn nice. I just told you I'm writing a review next week. I would have loved to have used the word superb, but I guess the New York Times claimed
They
that.
own it now. Yeah.
I'll find some good adjectives though, but it's up there. I don't know yet if it's my favorite Grady Hendrix novel because you and I have spoken previously, and I let
Yeah.
you know that after I finished my best friend's exorcism, I was sobbing on a flight. There was a very nice woman who could have been out of one of your novels next to me, and she was like, "Oh dear, what's wrong?" And I told her I just finished a great novel, and she said, "What is it?" And I held it up, and she just went, "Oh," and that was the end of that. So
Bless your heart.
this one's, I just finished it the other day. This one's got to sit with me for a bit, but I will say that for me, it's your most emotional novel
Oh, thanks.
and your most infuriating. And we'll get to it.
Okay.
We'll get to it. So let me start off. We've got 9 questions.
All right.
Of all, no gotcha questions.
Oh, damn it.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll throw one in now. I'll
Yeah,
throw one in.
please.
Okay, so you have stated in your video that how you see witches speaks to how comfortable you are with women having power. And I thought that was perfect because you and I have spoken about witches previously. And what is a witch?
Right.
Is it the old crone? Is it Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock? I mean, it's this spectrum, and it's all points in between. So do you feel like it has to do more with whatever time period you're in dictates how you see a witch?
I think time period, I think the culture, and I think individual, it's really hard to think your way into the 15th century, when the first big witch trials, the big sort of spread of them began. I mean, just sort of the 15th century worldview is so alien. You might as well be trying to think your way into the mind view of someone from the planet Mars. It's just really hard. But one thing that was really difficult for writing this book was when I realized witches were going to be the main sort of protagonist, antagonist, when I realized that I don't want to call them the bad guys, but kind of the bad guys in the book, I was like, well, really? Like, do I want the witches to be evil? I don't entirely disagree with them.
Yeah.
And that's when I sort of realized that how you depict a witch is how you're depicting women in power and your comfort level with that. And, the witch is really the only female monster that goes all the way through. I mean, there's vampires, there's werewolves, ghosts are not always gendered, but witches are really the only one women get all the way through. And so it's really so much is laid onto that. They've got so many barnacles on the hull of that ship.
Yeah.
And like you said, is a witch, Helena Marcos in Suspiria, Or is a witch, Margaret Hamilton in Wizard of Oz? Or is a witch Nicole Kidman in Practical Magic? Like, it's a really wide range of identities and personalities. So it's tough. Like you've kind of got to pin down what your witch is very specifically to do anything with her.
I'm so curious. You just opened up the next question, which I didn't have. So bonus question.
Yeah.
Does that confine you, or is that freeing because you have so much to choose from?
Freeing. I mean, it means you have to be specific. I mean, one of the big things you have to do when you're writing a book is be specific. I was just helping someone out with a pitch for a TV series they're working on, and the big problem they had throughout was really being specific in what that meant. If you write that a character is wrestling with demons in their past or a sense of failure, well, why? What's the sense of failure from? Like, when did that happen? How long ago? What was it? And that informs who they are. So with a witch, it's, okay, exactly what witch, exactly when, exactly where. Those are the choices that make it come alive, those details. Writing a book is a weird thing because on a really stupid level, it's making an incredibly large number of highly specific choices, and every specific choice, every detail makes what you're writing a more complicated system, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to write a book about these maternity homes. Okay, it's going to be set in 1970. Okay, when in 1970? Well, May to September. Okay, that's specific. Where? Okay, Florida. What else is going to be at? Well, witches. Okay, well, and so each choice makes it more specific and more complicated and more detailed. And the goal is to eventually come up with something that's a system that's so complex and has such detail in it that it almost takes on a life of its own. Where if you move this detail a little to the right, it changes all these other things around it. And if you're just patient enough and exacting enough to think through all those detail changes, things come up that surprise you. Oh, yeah, well, if that happened, that can't be on the same day as this. So there'd have to be a couple of days. Well, what are they doing in those days? Oh, this. So it's really, so I find details and specificity really freeing, not confining.
Do you ever get to a point when you're doing your first, second, third, fourth draft where you get to a specific detail and you're like, oh no, now it's a domino effect all the way back to the beginning?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And do you just start, like, what do you do at that point?
I mean, that's the job. You start over. I mean, you can do one of two things. If you want to skate by, you can kind of cover it up. And if you want to do the right job, you go back to the beginning and do it again, unfortunately. I mean, the good thing is writing isn't terribly physically intensive work. So you're capable of doing it sitting in a comfortable chair in a climate controlled room.
Nice.
So it's, so even things like starting over, it's like, well, it could be worse. We could be, building a bridge and have to start over.
This is true. Okay, let's talk research, because your books, all of your novels, they're so incredibly detailed and specific to a time and a place. I think it's one of your master strengths is you really create atmosphere and environment. It becomes a character. If I could give you a compliment, and I hope you take this as a compliment, Grady, when I read your work, it reminds me so much of Michael McDowell.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I love Michael McDowell.
Oh, yeah, just every time I read him, I immediately want to go to one of your books and vice versa. So, but the strength that you both have is that you create this incredible environment, this atmosphere. You can feel the heat, especially because your books take place down south. His books took place down south as well. You really paint a picture of almost the physical torture of being down in Florida in May at Wellwood House, as with all the blinds are drawn because heaven forbid the neighbors see what's going on here with these horrible pregnant teen girls, and you feel all that. I mean, it just forgive me, but it drips off the page. The sweat literally drips off the page. How much research do you do, and how long do you research before you're like, okay, let's get at it?
I mean, I research until I'm sort of ready to begin writing. And that point, you get a feel for that. But then you're researching all the way through. I mean, oh, they're watching TV. What are they watching? Oh, I need my television schedule for that night. Oh, right. I haven't been really focusing on how hot it's going to get in a house with no central air. Okay, I really need to. And some of it's research is sitting there and thinking things through. And some of it's research where you really need to experience it. Thinking things through like heat, like what's that like? Okay, oh God, okay, what's the hottest I've ever been? Blah blah blah. Some of it you need to experience. Like, I mean, when I did Horror Store, a lot takes place in the dark. And so my building had a basement with no windows in it. So I spent time down there sort of in the dark, getting that feel for walking around in really serious darkness, and how weird that was. And then there's research like, oh, how did people do labor and delivery in 1970? And so that's doing interviews with people, and that's reading. So it's a lot. But that's the job.
That's the job. Yeah.
Really make those specific decisions. And you know more than what's on the page, but you have to, like I know a lot more about what's going on around the book than's on the page, but of course I do. I need to, or else, the audience isn't going to believe me.
Did this book always take place in 1970, or did you land on that? It did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted it to be well enough before Roe versus Wade that there weren't real rumors of that or issues with that in the mainstream. And really Roe, that court battle and everything, and in the court of public opinion, that really started earlier in 72, even though the decision was 73. So I wanted time there. And I also didn't want to make it so far in the past. People be like, oh, well, that was the 1950s. It was all different back then.
Yeah. And you just say
1970 was about as modern as I could get. Yeah.
It would have been easy to kind of brush it off if it was the 50s, stuff like, oh, that's just the way it was back then. Yeah. But the 70s is such an interesting time period for the novel to take place, because it really is just before Roe v. Wade. We're 3 years before Roe v. Wade. And really, like, it's like a powder keg, because your protagonists are so powerless up until, and look, let's be honest, Wellwood House is a prison.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, people didn't know what to do with these girls. They would get pregnant, and it was enormously embarrassing. It was people were ashamed. It had real ramifications. I mean, if you were pregnant and not married in high school in 1970, you were immediately expelled. I mean, in public school, there was no, they didn't want you to contaminate the other kids. It was just automatic expulsion. And so it really was life-changing, and no one knew what to do. And what's funny is Black families, it was different. There were some Black maternity homes, and definitely there were integrated maternity homes, but the vast majority of Black families who had a teenage pregnancy in them, they more often than not, the pregnant girl stayed home. Maybe she would do a go visit an aunt kind of thing. Maybe she would do, she would have the kid and it would be raised within the family or adopted by someone else in the family, a cousin or someone distant like that, or adopted within their social network. But I think it's something like 73% of teenage pregnancies in Black families they were not going to maternity homes. They were staying home. So being sent to a maternity home wasn't the only option, but these white families felt like it was the only option for them. And certainly some Black families felt the same way. But that said, yeah, people felt like this was the end of the world. They didn't know what to do. And this was the best solution. It was a terrible solution, but it was the only thing they could come up with. That fit the needs of the family, where the girl would be hidden and it would be secret and they wouldn't have to deal with the baby again, but they also wouldn't be terminating the baby's life. So it was designed to make it as easy as possible for the parents. Girls were secondary consideration.
Oh, I mean, and that comes through the secondary consideration for sure. Okay, so the novel starts and we have Neva, aka Fern.
Fern, yeah.
She's on her way to Wellwood House down in Florida with her father. And I mean, you could feel the rage of the father percolating in the
Yeah.
car. I mean, my anxiety was going through the roof. My question to you is, and by the way, so here's two, middle-aged dudes talking about women and witchcraft. But it's what we do. How do you write women so incredibly well? How did you write a 15-year-old young woman so incredibly well? How do you get into the mindset?
Well, I mean, it's the same as for any character, really. I mean, you really have to, there's always a different way in. Everyone I write is based on someone real. It might be just someone I see in a photograph or on the street, or someone I know very well. But there's always, and they're never recognizable by the time they wind up on the page. But I really have to start imagining who they are and what they're worried about and what their concerns are and what they want. And I mean, all that basic kind of boring, what do they want? What do they like? What's comfortable to them? What's uncomfortable for them? What are they good at? What are they bad at? And with what really happened with this book is I wanted to write it for a long time. Where I knew this situation, actually, no. This situation really bothered me for a long time. I had some relatives who I found out late in their lives were sent away when they were teenagers because they were both raped and got pregnant, and no one knew about it till late in life. And it always kind of bugged me. It always ate at me. And I wound up reading this book by a woman named Ann Fessler called "The Girls Who Went Away," which is kind of the only popular history of the maternity homes. And it's there's some academic ones, but it's really the popular one. And it's an oral history, so it's mostly these girls talking about their experience. And I knew there was a book there, like just the idea of these homes with these kids, they're pregnant, not knowing what's going to happen to them, not knowing what's going to happen to their babies, not knowing each other's names. Yeah. Really, I was like, God, there's a story here. And I finally was like, okay, I think I'm going to try to write this. And I wound up reading this book from 1903 by a woman named Mary McLean called "I Await the Devil's Coming." It's been republished, but it was basically, she wrote it when she was a teenager. And it's really about her life and how boring it is to grow up in Montana, and how she wants the devil to come and sort of take her away from everything. And that was really, I was like, oh, I get that opening sort of sit, listen, introductory frame, but that came right from Mary McLean. Wow. And I was like, I've got that. And then I was like, okay, that's sort of a little but what would be how? So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to be driving to the home. Someone's going to take you there. And I was like, that's going to be a really uncomfortable car ride. Oh. And so I really spent a long time writing and rewriting that scene, because I was like, and that's really where I started figuring out how long is that car ride in? Are they eating? Is she hungry? Like, how, the car have good AC? What are they listening to? They're not. And so that car ride was really my way in for Fern.
Oh, it works. It's just so good. I mean, it really sets the tone, and you're just like, oh boy, we're in for it. Poor Fern. We're in for it, and all the girls. Okay, I have to ask, was it always witches? I know you wanted to write about the homes, but was it always witches?
No, and in fact, the first two drafts of this book, it had witches in the title, but it was originally going to be called All of Them Witches, and then The Witches of Wellwood House. One was sort of from the name of the book in Rosemary's Baby, All of Them Witches, and then Witches of Wellwood House, which was sort of a play on Witch of Blackbird Pond. And there's a lot of titles, like the Witches of. There's a Gothic novel from the 19th century, The Witches of, God, I can't remember now, Essex or something. I can't remember. But anyways. But it was a folk horror book, and it was really, really different. Holly was a very different character. It had a lot more to do with folk tales in the area and fertility gods and all this. And it wasn't working. And my editor was like, well, witches is in the title, and there are not any witches in the book. And she was like, I do a show instead of a traditional author event. And she's like, well, what's the show going to be about? And I was like, witches. And she's like, again, no witches in the book. It's like, right, witches. And so that's when I really had to drill it. But I'd done 2 whole drafts of
the book.
So book and a much worse book. It was all about sort of, Pan and fertility gods
Okay.
and Dionysus and all this goofy stuff.
So now you've landed on, oh, okay, we have to we have to do witchcraft. What do you do from that point? Is it, do you just start kind of cherry picking? Is it an amalgam of all Wicca and witchcraft, or did you lean into one specifically?
Yeah, so I tried not to. I mean, I had to sort of bone up on Wicca and paganism and things just to get some grounding there. I drew more from classical witchcraft with like Medea and Circe and things, Hecate, things like that, more. And I also didn't want to really, because I know for a lot of people, they are self-proclaimed witches and they are Wiccans or pagans, and I really didn't want to be stepping on their toes
Yeah, I get that.
and co-opting their belief system. Um, but I really had a hard time with these witches. And what I finally realized is, and really my way in for the witches was, I read a lot of sort of political action literature from 1970, stuff by the Weather Underground or student groups that were against the war or to stop the war, or the Black Panthers, or Witch, the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. And it was those groups that really felt like, and rightly so in many cases, that they were at war with American society and mainstream American society. And they were debating how much violence was acceptable and what kind of tactics to use. And, really their survival. I mean, they were being assassinated and targeted and infiltrated. And I was like, and that became the voice of my witches. The Anarchist Cookbook, which, God, I think it's funny. I want to make sure I'm giving because I think it was like, 71, which was written in 71, which is, I think every teenage boy I knew had a copy. How to make a pipe bomb, how to bug about all that stuff. It was, and the guy who wrote it since disavowed it, but it was how to lead a revolution from your, basement. And the language in that really informed the language of my witches. This idea that this is a struggle, it's a radical struggle, it's a struggle that requires violence. There is a price to pay for that. And you were at war. This is asymmetrical warfare. And so that was really when I started getting my witches. I was like, okay, I got that. And the more I was able to embrace that and its implications, the better this book, the more the witches made sense in this book.
They make sense and they feel so real because, I mean, the novel's really all about power, who has it, who doesn't. And our core four, they get power, but they're still only 15-year-olds, you know?
Right.
So no spoilers. I don't want to give any spoilers because everyone's got to read this book, but it felt so real. I don't have experience as a 15-year-old girl, but I do have experience as a 15-year-old idiot. And I'm not saying that the protagonists are idiots in any way, but they do feel 15.
Yeah. I mean, there's an aspect where you are an idiot at 15. Your brain's not fully developed. You don't have enough experience. Like, and and that's the really hard thing. And I hear this from parents a lot, especially parents of like trans kids who are saying, this is really hard because I don't trust you home alone when I'm out of town, but I need to trust you on this big medical decision, and you hear it also when, and it's something that I think is really, when do you believe your kid? And I think that's one reason that a lot of times allegations of abuse from kids or things like that are not believed, because parents don't know when, and adults aren't in the habit of believing teenagers. And are their reasoning, is their rationale good? Possibly. I mean, I don't believe a lot of the crap teenagers say to me, but how do you know? You know what I mean? And so how do you know a teenager
never
knows
know
what's best for them? How far can you trust them? How far do you trust them? How far do you let them make mistakes? It's really intense. And one of the things that was really funny for me is growing up, I'm from Charleston. And so I'm from a lot of my cousins are in the military, and Paris Island is near there. And so
My dad was there. He was a former Marine. Yeah.
Yeah, so you'd always see these knobs coming in off the airplane, and they'd meet their drill sergeant at the airport gate, who'd have them form up and and be really, the training starts when they get off the plane. And so you'd always be, since I was a kid, you'd be walking by these guys, girls getting yelled at, and all this stuff, and you realize these are kids. They're 18, and you're like, wow, these are children. And within a year, they could be in Afghanistan or Iraq, under arms, being expected to make combat decisions. And that's terrifying when you see their faces and you're like, that looks like the kid who was just running the register at, Harris Teeter. Like,
yeah,
they're the same age. Like, and so it's so kids and trusting them and letting them have responsibility and that kind of thing. It's a big thing to me. I think it's really, and I think it's something everyone grapples with if they're honest. And something you said about Fern's dad being so angry with her. One thing people have pushed back on in my books from time to time is parents losing their shit with children. And I'm like, dude, I don't have children, but I know that happens. I've seen that happen. Like, it doesn't make the parent a monster in every case. It doesn't make the kid a victim in every case, but parents lose their shit. Parents hit their kids. Parents scream at their kids. Parents blame their kid. This happens. But it's something people are very uncomfortable with seeing.
Maybe that's they're just seeing themselves a little bit.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm just going to do a quick story.
Oh, yeah,
but
please.
It'll illustrate what we're talking about. My dad's at Paris Island. He's 18 years old. They're on the pistol range. A bunch of 18-year-olds lined up. The kid next to him, and I say kid specifically because that's what you are when you're 18. The drill sergeant, he was supposed to fire one shot, and he fired two. And the drill sergeant came up and screamed at him, and he got nervous, and he turned around, and he blew my father's elbow clean off. Yeah.
Jeez.
So my dad was always like, my career in the Marines was short-lived. He did his 4 years, and he's like, it was phenomenal because I spent most of it at the VA hospital in DC, going to dinner, and going to the bars. So he's like, I had a real good time in the Marines, which not a lot of people say, but yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny, that's sort of like one of the things that like I find so I don't want to say frustrating, but I don't know, what year was Full Metal Jacket?
What year is it supposed to take place, or what year did the movie come out?
I think it was 86, the year it came out.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. 86 or 87
like
for sure.
The actors in Full Metal Jacket are too old.
Way too old.
Vincent D'Onofrio is like 27 or 28 in that. Like, that movie is so much more believable if he casts 18 and 19-year-olds in it. And I get why he did it. He wanted more mature actors. But like, to me, that movie becomes so much more horrific if Vincent D'Onofrio is 18,
It should have been the cast of the Goonies a few years later, have been in Full Metal Jacket. And it would have been, people would have been aghast, but that's the reality of it. So, okay, I'm so sorry. I took us all over the map. But the point is, you capture that period in time where when you're a teen, you go from 0 to 60. You haven't developed your gears yet. So when you get that power, oh boy, look out.
Yeah. Well, and that was one thing, earlier there were several drafts of this book that were in first person from Fern's point of view and present tense, because I didn't want people to feel like it was history. I wanted to feel immediate. And it was too emotionally hot for readers. They really didn't like it. They really didn't like the girls in the book. And I realized it was because they needed to understand that they needed that third person, because they needed some indication that these girls weren't out of control, that they were teenagers and hotheads and could lose their cool, but that it wasn't me saying that. It was them. It was, for some reason, changing it to third person really lowered the emotional intensity for people.
I guess I could see that. It's interesting. I'm like, oh boy, that would have been interesting to read. But I could see that because it is, you don't want to lose your audience. You want them to feel for your protagonists and care for them, even when they're doing some things, again, no spoilers, but even when they're doing things that, raise an eyebrow. We'll leave it there.
Well, exactly. They wanted the character. If you're first person, you don't have any perspective on yourself. Which I think is great with some characters. But in this case, it's teenagers, and people wanted to make sure there was perspective here. It made the readers feel more comfortable. Anyway.
Where did you find the recipes? Where did you... The food in this book, I know people talk about it. I've been reading the interviews, and everyone lands on the food. Where the hell did you find these recipes?
Oh, man. So one of the things I do when I research is I buy a lot of magazines from the months in the time period I'm doing. And all of them, it was I picked up a lot of Mademoiselles and Family Circus and Southern Livings and stuff. And they all just had some dank, they all had a lot of recipes in them. And I started to read the recipes, especially in Southern Living, and they were really atrocious. So then I started to look up a lot of sort of fly-by-night cookbooks and a lot of church cookbooks. My wife is a chef. She has a huge collection of cookbooks, and there's a lot of church cookbooks and a lot of especially Southern cookbooks that have been gifted to us over the years. And man, there are some shady recipes in there. And, when you're pregnant, and especially in the 70s, there was this real obsession with how much weight you could gain and your diet and whether you were getting enough nutrition. And it really resulted in some bizarre choices. Prunella, it was a thing, Yeah.
Oh, it's so much fun for the reader. So again, highly encourage everyone to go out and get this book.